My name's Cody Mosier. I'm 30 years old. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up exposed to drugs and alcohol prior to me even evolving in my disease. I grew up with my grandma, my mother, and then sometimes living with friends. And I had not a lot of supervision growing up. So I kind of got to do whatever I wanted, which, at a young age evolved to started to doing drugs. I saw drugs at a young age before I knew what it was. I remember I went underneath the sink, and I think I found like my stepdad's bong, and I didn't know what it was, and I grabbed it and I smelt it and looked at it, and I remember blowing in it and all the water went all over me. Yeah, I remember the first time I smoked weed. I smoked weed. I was probably like 11, 12 years old. I stole it from my stepdad. With me and a bunch of buddies went behind a pizza shop in my neighborhood that I grew up with and smoked weed. I did it consistently after that. So I started smoking weed, I drank a little bit, was really big on alcohol. I drank like socially, never really, wasn't really my thing. Started taking painkillers, had done amphetamines, and then I did IV heroin when I was about in 11th grade. It was becoming problematic. My school went down, my attitude, and then I just was becoming a full-fledged drug addict, but in like the early stages of it. I got arrested as an adult when I was 19 years old. I'm maybe coming up on 20. I got arrested and I got charged with the 211 strong arm robbery. Me and my friend, we mugged this kid coming from an ATM to get money for drugs. It was like 2:00 in the morning. Me and one of my friends were waiting for this kid to come from an ATM. He was pulling out $500, and I think, if I can remember correctly, it's kind of fuzzy, but someone had told us, "Hey, so and so is going to go to an ATM. They're going to pull out $500. Why don't you just go take it from them, and then we'll get it and we'll split it." I got caught. I know it's really fuzzy. Someone called the cops, I think, like that was around out on the street. I was in jail for that case for like, I think 90 days, and then they bailed me out. I was terrified at first, and then I kind of became not terrified of it anymore, and it kind of just became a norm. My fear was that I might be stuck in here for a long time, and it might affect me wanting to get high. Like I was like, what are they? Can I smoke weed in there? Like that was my first thought. So basically, yeah, I got out. They posted my bond. I fought the case for a little bit. I had to turn myself back into jail for like, I don't know. I think the first time was close to a year or something like that. So I had to turn myself back in. And when I turned myself back in, I was still using. And that little like chunk of time that I did right there, I kind of evolved from, this like kind of, I wasn't a convict, obviously. I was a little kid fucking from Southern California. I was into punk rock music and all this shit. And it kind of changed me a little bit because I emulated these other convict drug addicts in there. You know what I mean? And then when I came out, I think I had a buzzed head, and you know what I mean? I was started getting tattoos, and I kind of took on that lifestyle from there. And I continued to go home, use, I got a little older. I got put on felony probation for the robbery. I ended up violating 3 times. My third violation was for felon in possession of firearm. I didn't actually get arrested with a gun, but there was a video with me with a gun. So an ex-girlfriend of mine had it on her phone, and my probation officer found it, and they sent me to prison from there. So I went to prison for 16 months for the strong arm robbery. So they took my case from the probation, and they just send you to prison for it. Oh, man, you know what? At first I was a little bit scared because it was like big boy prison, and you know what I mean? Like there was a lot more of politics going on and assaults and people getting stabbed and getting pepper sprayed by cops and getting beat up. And I remember, okay, so we pull up, we're all in the van in county jail. We all have our yellows on and stuff, and they make you throw on these county jail yellows, but you don't get to have like a t-shirt on underneath it. So I was sweaty, and we're all chained up, and they come and pick you up in the middle of the night and take you up there, and then they drop you off. And it was Wasco State Prison, I think, for reception. And we're all getting off the bus. We're all chained up. And I just remember it like kind of hitting me like, because, I had been to county jail already a bunch of times, and that to me was like nothing. You know what I mean? I could go to county jail, get out, come back, whatever. I didn't, you know what I mean? It wasn't anything to me. But when I remember getting off the bus and like looking up around me, and like there's just these big walls with these guards on the walls with guns, and I remember something stood out to me. It was a big old sign on the wall, and it said, "No warning shots fired." There was a large scale riot, and that was like probably one of the only times that I was afraid for my life. So it was like around noontime, I think, and we were coming back in from the yard, and there's a bunch of people obviously with you, and I just remember like looking around and seeing everybody, and I could feel the tension in the air, and it was like dead silent. And then there was a large scale riot, and we ended up getting pepper sprayed. A bunch of people got stabbed. A bunch of people got hit with block guns. They would buzz the alarm. Everybody would get up, fight, and then they'd spray us or shoot us with block guns. Everybody would lay back down. Everybody get back up until eventually they, quell it and get everybody in zip tie handcuffs. It was a lot different, but there was drugs there, way more than there was in county jail. And the first time I was in prison, I didn't really do them all the time. I dabbled a couple times because a lot of the older guys were like, "Hey, check it out, kid. If you get caught up in this, you know what I mean? It could turn out bad for you. Acquiring a drug debt in prison and stuff like that." So I had got high a few times, but not as much as I would later on. I went back 3 times. Altogether, with prison and county jail, I was probably incarcerated like 6 years, something like that, with county and court cases and the robbery, and then I ran somebody over. So that was the second time I had been to prison. So I was actually down in South Orange County, where we are right now. And I had already been to prison the first time, came home, I was on parole. I was at a house party in like Laguna Niguel or something like that. And I was at a house party with a bunch of people, and I ended up getting in a fight with one kid. So I got in a fight out front. I punched this kid, and then when I turned around, I got jumped by like 6 guys, and they were choking me out on the ground. I remember I was about to faint, and I was high too. I was on Xanax, I think. So this is kind of blurry, but I remember I was about to faint. And I ended up getting up because I think I pushed my car keys into the kid's side of his face, and I got out of the chokehold, got into my ex-girlfriend's car. I was trying to get out of there, and I was putting it in reverse, and someone broke the windshield from the side. And then I was going to lock the doors, and someone opened the door and was trying to grab me out. So like without even thinking, I just put the car in reverse and then reversed like, I don't know, 50 feet or something like that, and then put it in drive, and I clipped one kid from the side, and then I hit one straight on. He was hurt bad, but he lived, which was miraculous because I was in county jail for that, for like, I think like 13 months, maybe a year, fighting the case, because since I had already been to prison, you know what I mean, and I was a drug addict, and I had already had multiple convictions prior to that, they weren't trying to hear my side of the story, which I was trying to leave the party, which I really did hit the kid on purpose. But my defense was I was trying to leave because I was getting beat up, and I had a big black eye at the time, and I was all scratched up. But they were trying to be like, they weren't trying to hear it. They're like, this is attempted murder. He's going to go to prison for 10 years. So at that point, when I was fighting it, I had just kind of accepted the fact that this was probably going to be my life, and it was going to be prison, and I might be gone for a little while. So when it all came through and I fought the case for a while, and they came at me with the deal because my state-appointed attorney that they appointed me said that since I was getting beat up and I was trying to leave, if we take it to trial, I might be able to beat it. But I wasn't going for the might be able to, because I knew if I lost in trial for that, and they had dropped the attempted murder, they changed it to assault with a vehicle, but they were going to suspend my license for the rest of my life, and I wouldn't be able to drive. And I wasn't trying to do that either. So they dropped it finally, and they said if I sign with assault with a deadly weapon, I'll sign for 2 years, and I would only have to go back to prison for like another year. So I took the deal. This previous relapse, I had been a little bit older, had already been to prison multiple times, and I had no place to go because I just got high, and I was managing a sober living actually, and they kicked me out. Obviously, I just left. And I was living I had this little Jetta that I was living in, and I was shooting dope, and I was living in my car, and like in the back of my mind, I was just like, I kept thinking, I was like, you know what, if I overdose, like I won't even care, because like I was so miserable that I didn't even know what to do. You know, I had no place to go. I wouldn't even care at that point. In my mind, I was like, man, I hope if I do this last shot that I don't wake up, because then I'm not going to have to be in misery like I was right then. This disease has affected me in the worst way. I can't even explain it. I have more friends than I can count on both hands who have all overdosed from drugs, specifically opiates. Man, there's so many. Okay, so the one that really strikes out to me is I started experiencing this death from drugs at a young age. And I was 16 years old when I experienced the first overdose, which is pretty young, because usually it'd be a little bit older. But yeah, my best friend when I was growing up, my buddy Dallas, he was a couple years older than me, and he overdosed on Oxycontin when he was 18, 19. His dad called me. I was at his house that day. We came back home to his house. His dad had called me. I thought it wasn't real. And there was a coroner truck out front of his house. It was in Newport Beach. I watched his body get carried down the stairs. I saw his feet hanging out of the sheet. It was something I'll never get out of my mind. I was heartbroken and confused. So if you think you're like really good at doing drugs, or you know this will never happen to you, it can, because I have a close friend of mine actually who was the last one to just pass away, who didn't really ever go overboard at all. He was always kind of like, I remember he told me, he goes, Cody, you know what? And I was like, what's up? He goes, you suck at doing drugs. And I was like, why? And he's like, because you're always overdosing, all this stuff. And he always had it under control. And it's kind of ironic that, you know, and super sad that he's actually not here anymore, and I still am. He overdosed on fentanyl, but a really small amount. And he was never really out of control. He was always kind of, you know, for the most part, I mean, as much as someone could be in control doing drugs. But it just goes to show you that if you think you have it, you don't, because you could die. And it's all really, you know, up to the luck of the draw. You know what I mean? If you mess around, the chances of you dying, especially with opiates, are great. And I've seen it, and it's super sad. And if you're here and you're struggling and you're still alive, you know, that's a miracle. And you should really reach out, because you don't have to live like this. You don't have to live in misery. You don't have to live in the dark. You could reach out and you could get help. Yeah. So being addicted to drugs can mess you up more ways than one. It screwed me up physically. I had cellulitis in my hand. If you see my finger right there, I got cellulitis in my hand from shooting up in my hand. And at first I thought it was a little bit abscessed, and it turned into a giant ball. My hand was like this big, and I had to go to the emergency room. I was there for like 3 days. Some people dropped me off. I had cellulitis in my hand. It was so painful. Like it was ridiculously painful. From what I remember, it was a little cloudy, but it was super painful. And then after it had healed, obviously it's in my hand and it's in a crucial area. Something happened and it healed wrong, and it built a bunch of scar tissue up in my knuckle of my left hand. So I can't close my hand, and I can't make a fist, and I can't properly grab stuff, and it affects me every day. So if anything physical has happened to me, that's a big one right there, and it affects me every day, and hopefully I could get it fixed. I knew that all of this, you know what I mean, in the back of my head was all related to drugs, you know what I mean? This is all because of my addiction. I had a kind of a little bit of moment of clarity. My daughter was born, and I was only there for like the first couple months. So that last time I was in prison, my mom was sending me pictures of my daughter. And this is the first time I could say, like, through my addiction when I was younger, that I was actually feeling something from, you know what I mean? All this pain and all this heartache that I was causing other people and myself. That was the first time that I actually felt something a little bit. Like, I was like, man, you know what I mean? I'm going to end up fucked up in here like some of these guys that are fucking 50 years old with, you know, 4 kids, and, you know what I mean, end up being a deadbeat dad just in prison. Man, this one's hard to talk about. But so anyways, I was getting high. Her birthday's today, actually. So 2013, January 15, 2013, my daughter was born. I was really bad at that point. Like I was really, really strung out. I looked horrible. I actually have a booking photo of me from the day that I got arrested right after she was born, and I look horrible. I was skinny. I was using heroin every day. Mostly heroin. I was taking Klonopin, doing Xanax, all that stuff. But I had just basically got this girl pregnant who was using too, and she got pregnant. We didn't even notice it until, you know what I mean, a couple months in probably. And I was telling her, I was like, listen, if you don't stop getting high, you're going to lose this kid and they're going to take her from you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she was like, well, you're not going to stop. And in my head, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not pregnant. You have to stop. You know what I mean? And which, you know what I mean? I wasn't a very good influence in it at all. So I got high with this girl who was pregnant with my kid. And I think in the back of my mind, like I felt so guilty about it that I was just like, there's no way this kid's going to be born. Like she has to be stillborn or whatever. I don't even know what I thought. Like, I just know that at that point in my life, it was 2012, almost 2013 when she was born, that I was so sick in my addiction that this girl was carrying my child. And I was putting a needle in my arm and watching her put a needle in her arm. And I was telling her, if you don't stop getting high, the baby's going to die, and or she's going to be born addicted to drugs, and they're going to take her from you, which is what happened. So she was born addicted to drugs. I don't think they had to give her morphine when she was born. I think they just had to keep her in an incubator. She had a little PICC line into her like a heart or whatever, because the babies can't have IVs. She was in there for a month, and then my daughter's mom's dad took her for like a month, and then my mom ended up adopting her when I was in prison. Oh man, I don't know. I just try to be there for her as much as I can. My mom has her, and my mom's doing a great job. It's kind of funny because I lived with my mom for a little bit, but for the most part, I grew up with my mom's mom, my grandma, and now my mom is actually taking care of my daughter. The worst heartache for me was watching my daughter be born when she was born under the influence like that. And then obviously the incarcerations and stuff. That was the worst heartache. To all my friends who have been there for me through this, through thick and thin, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. You know what I mean? It's miraculous that I'm alive right now anyways, because I have more friends that I can count on both hands that are not here anymore because of this disease. And for some reason I am. And a big part of that is the people that helped me, that knew that, you know what I mean, I could get through this and get past it, which I didn't see at the time. You know what I mean? I just thought this is probably how it was going to be. But for those people, I couldn't thank enough, and they all know who they are. If I could say anything to anybody struggling like I was, I know exactly how you feel. I've been there 100%. If you have to deal with any of the probation, prison, jail, anything like that, I've been there, and it's nothing but heartache and pain. And if I could give anybody any advice, you know, would be to get yourself help, because you can do it. I know if I can do it in this situation that I was in and what I went through, and like my early childhood, and like I know that they could too, because there's really all you need is willingness. The first time in treatment, it was definitely scary for me. You know what I mean? I had this big tough guy persona wall up, which really isn't really me. I'm really not like that. If anybody knows me, they know I might look like that, but I'm not like that at all. But I had this big wall up, and I was in treatment, and they wanted to talk about feelings and, like, you know, all this shit that I had, you know, put a wall up against. And there was all these people, and it reminded me of it reminded me of jail, how there was a bunch of people around me that I thought in the back of my head that I could go the rest of my life without ever being around because I was so miserable. And I had a big wall up, but eventually I learned to drop it and to kind of go with the flow. And I figured out later on that it was easier to just kind of give in and kind of, you know, let this process work itself out. Then it was easier to do that than it was to fight it. my brain would trick myself. Like I would go into it and I'd be like, and I finally, I would let that wall down and I'd give in, and I started getting help with therapists and opening up about my past. And I was always really ashamed about like my daughter, how she was born and like being incarcerated and all that. And once I like let all that out, I felt a lot better about talking about it. And my brain would trick me and I would think, oh yeah, I got this. You know what I mean? Like that's what my brain does. I get clean and my brain would trick me into thinking like, I got this. And then I would just coast on, and then I had relapsed a couple times. There's a word for this that you use in treatment. It's called being terminally unique, and meaning like you think you're different and this isn't going to affect you like this, or, this isn't going to help me. That it's not true. Like I remember feeling like that and then having that broken down and realizing that the reality of this disease, it takes lives, and you're not different. There's a bunch of people just like you and me, and we are the same, and you don't have to be ashamed of it. You don't have to be scared. You can get help. So if anything I have said relates to anybody I'm speaking to right now, and you feel that pain and suffering from getting high, you don't have to live like that. You could get help. You could reach out to family. You could reach out and try to get into treatment. You could, there's 100 things that you could do. I know that there's a lot of people out there, and it breaks my heart to know that they're suffering in silence with this addiction and alcoholism. And this disease is killer. It's taken many people out of my life. So if you're even thinking that you might need help, you probably do. And my advice to you would be to get it, because it's just going to get worse. If you're someone who doesn't think you need treatment and you have a drug problem or an alcohol problem, it's going to get worse. You can end up in jail. You can end up in prison. You can end up dead. I've seen it, and it's not good. That whole, having that wall up and not wanting to let anybody in and not wanting to get help, it's only going to hurt you. You know what I mean? If you just give a little bit, of effort into this thing and kind of try to figure out what's going on with you besides, having a drug problem or an alcohol problem and all this pain and trauma that you've gone through. If you just try to work with them a little bit and try to figure it out, I guarantee you it's going to be 100% easier than trying to fight it. And it might save your life. If I could say something to, an addict struggling, or anybody who think they might be an addict or, might not think they are, but have dabbled, I can tell you that it's nothing but heartache and pain. I'm on the other side of it. It will fuck your whole life up. Drugs and alcohol fucked my whole life up. And if it wasn't for, me trying to get sober and coming out on the other side, I could be dead or incarcerated for the rest of my life. I've seen things and I've been through things that I wouldn't want anybody else, especially you listening, to have to go through. You don't have to do what I did. You don't have to go to state prison. You don't have to go to county jail. You don't have to sell yourself. You don't have to do any of this fucked up stuff. You could stop. And from the bottom of my heart, I hope anybody listening that needs help reaches out and gets it, because your life and you're worth it.